Hello and welcome back to the vlog. So my recent videos have focused on my contemporary state, and people ask me often, how did I earn the title Miracle Man? How did I get from that stage when I was skin and bones to hiking up Mount Takao within was it 4 or 5 months? So to tell that story, I'm gonna take a trip back to June and July and then take it from there. And so I've asked my sister and my father to retell the story because I don't remember any of that period. And you can also refer back to chapters 6 and 7 where I enlist my mother's help.
So Jeremy's asked me to talk about some of the time when he was really sick last summer. I have been avoiding doing this video. I'm not as brave as my brother. I find sharing my emotions so publicly quite difficult, and just thinking too much about that time is it's challenging, to say the least. But I want to talk about, or he would like me to talk about, something that hasn't come up in his video so far. It's quite an interesting point in his sickness. He was really, really sick at this point. I mean, literally, I thought every day might be his last one. He was that poorly. He was in bed, he couldn't walk, he couldn't talk. And we had to take care of all of his personal needs. And it just, the worst thing was that he couldn't express how he was feeling. He could understand what we were saying, he could respond physically, and it just seemed like all of the time he was either asleep, in excruciating pain, like writhing around in agony, or desperately sad. And then something quite strange happened. He started blurting out whole sentences, quite a lot of swearing in them sometimes. And there was a bit of excitement about this. It showed some kind of recovery, but I wasn't so sure. Because yes, he was speaking in whole sentences, but there was something not quite right about it. The context was wrong. So I didn't feel as excited as other people. And then one night I was on my own with him for the night, and he started doing this, shouting. I thought he just looks different. And I said to him, "Can I ask you a question?" "Yes." "Do you know who I am?" "No." He looked really confused. "No." And I said to him, I'm Lorna. "Do you know who I am now?" And he lay down and closed his eyes and relaxed and nodded. I said, "Do you know that I'm your sister?" "Yes." And he went back to sleep. And the next night was worse. Shoko was with him and she called me to help. He was angry, fighting us off, didn't want to have his bed changed. And again I asked him, "Do you know who I am?" "No." "I'm Lorna. Do you know who I am now?" "No." And that's when I realised what was happening. So during these episodes, when he was able to be very vocal, he didn't know who we were. He didn't know who he was. He didn't recognise any music I played him, whether it was our old favourites from when we were kids, or, newer things, or Guns N' Roses, anything that he's always loved. No, didn't know any of that music. No. Have you heard this before? No. And I noticed that when he was like this, there was a physical change in his face too. His pupil dilation was what I noticed first. So you could be chatting away to him and he's being normal Jeremy, can't speak, can't respond, and then suddenly his eyes would change. I think, okay. And I'd ask him a question No, don't know the answer to that. And he could speak then. What cruel twist of fate is that? That when you're yourself in your own mind, you can't vocalise how you feel. And then like that, something happens in here, and you can say a whole bunch of stuff, quite often rude stuff, but you have no recollection of who you are, who anyone is. How scary. How scary for him. It was a fascinating period. I think it went on for about 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. And yeah, I found it really interesting, but heartbreaking. And he doesn't remember any of this because it was like it wasn't him. It was like a Jekyll and Hyde scenario. You had Dr. Jekyll, who was lovely, but couldn't talk, actually. And then suddenly Mr. Hyde is there, and he'd be bossing us around. He liked to swear at, particularly at me at that time. But I've had years of that, so it was okay. And gradually that started to change again. And I guess the tumour was shrinking a bit in his brain. And he started to be able to talk and know what things were and who we were. But it was a very, very challenging time for us all. And very difficult to see him so scared, angry, yes, but how terrifying to not know who you are or what's happening to you or who these strange people are trying to do things that you don't want them to do. Yeah, one of the many challenges of 2022.
Jeremy has asked me if I could add anything further to Lorna's recollection of Jeremy's illness in June and July, particularly last year. And I have to say that she summed up that time perfectly. The seemingly relentless, ruthless decay slowly began to decrease, and scintillas or tiny sparks of the miracle that has been happening started to emerge, although none of us knew to what extent that would be. And I believe that Shoko's persistence in seeking further treatment was a huge part of that. Despite that and the traumas we all experience were nothing compared to Jeremy's condition, which was dire. There were things that helped that, and I think that one of the best things was Alyssa and Isla's innocence that lightened the mood on quite a number of occasions. So I'm going to relate something a little lighter but significant, which happened during my second visit later in July. Jeremy that is, had been slowly but excitingly becoming more lucid in his speech. In fact, the last few weeks I was there had been most encouraging. Several times he called me to tell me things which were of either a serious or personal nature, or something completely irreverent. One day he called me when he was trying to make a new song playlist, on his phone. And this task carried on for quite some time, over a period. He would come up with the tune that he wanted on it, and he would ask me to insert it in the playlist. And because the dexterity in his left hand it wasn't very good at the time, and his right arm was still paralyzed. I did this a few times on his on his asking, and I made a few suggestions of songs which weren't always good. Probably a bit too old-fashioned, I guess. Anyway, the following day he asked me to carry on, but I couldn't find the playlist. I was really worried and thinking that I might have erased it. And he did get a little agitated about it because it looked as if I'd wiped it off somewhere, not being used to music on phones, as mine is all on my iPad. Anyway, eventually I found it because his is on a Spotify, whereas all my music is on iTunes, and that's what I was looking for, so it hadn't disappeared, fortunately. Anyway, the following day he called me in and he apologised for shouting at me, which he hadn't. But the fact that he had remembered the incident was another wonderful sign of the recovery that is carrying on now. Okay.
So you can see that cancer is truly evil, and it's clever as well. By no means is the battle over, but I'm really grateful to have come this far. As to the contributing factors for my recovery, there's several, and it wouldn't do them justice to list them in this chapter. So I'll go into more depth in successive chapters. My father mentioned one, which was Choco's persistence in researching into the medical profession and contacting doctors around the world to seek alternative help. That was one in a whole host of contributing factors. I had close family and friends all working tirelessly to aid my recovery.